Across medieval continents, from stone monasteries in Europe to steaming kitchens in Japan, the scent of bread meant survival. It was the smell of warmth in a cold century, a hands kneading faith into flour. Before machines or recipes, people everywhere learned to turn grain into life, by touch, by fire, and by patience. In the West, loaves rose in stone ovens. In the East they steamed, baked on clay, or roasted in ashes. To bake bread was to believe, in grain, in time, and in one another. Across the medieval world, grains were the heartbeat of civilization. Long before bread had recipes or prestige, it was simply the way humanity survived winter, war, and scarcity. In Europe, fields of wheat, barley, and rye rippled under pale northern skies. In the Arab and Persian lands, hardy durum wheat and millet sustained travellers of the desert. Farther east, rice, millet, and barley nourished farmers across China, Korea, and Japan. Crops adapted to monsoon and mountain alike. Each grain carried its own temperament. Wheat rose proudly, yielding light, airy loaves for those with wealth or fertile soil. Barley and rye, darker and more stubborn, became the bread of the poor, dense yet enduring. In the east, rice did not rise. It clung together, soft and fragrant, perfect for steaming rather than baking. Yet all these grains, from the golden plains of Europe to the flooded paddies of Asia, shared a single purpose: to keep people alive. Every seed was a prayer in miniature, a promise buried in earth and returned as sustenance. Medieval people understood this deeply. They spoke to their fields, blessed their harvests, and stored their grain, as if guarding a fragment of life itself. Whether in a monastery granary or a Persian caravan tent, to hold a handful of grain was to hold hope, the quiet certainty that another day of warmth, labour, and faith could begin. Grinding was the shared rhythm of medieval mornings, the pulse of daily labour echoing across continents. In Europe, the clatter of watermills turned valleys into living machines. Wooden wheels creaked. Stone grinders sang as they crushed wheat into pale dust. For peasants, this sound meant sustenance. For millers, it meant power, for they held control over the pace of bread itself. In the Middle East, women knelt beside quern stones in sunlit courtyards, pushing one stone over another with slow precision. The rhythm was meditative, a song of survival. Each handful of flour was earned through patience and strength, connecting generations of hands to the same timeless gesture. The act was quiet, yet sacred, the transformation of grain into nourishment, potential into sustenance. In East Asia, the pounding of mortars replaced the turning of stones. Wooden mallets struck rice and barley in steady intervals, echoing through mountain villages and temple courtyards. Steam rose from freshly milled grain, mingling with morning mist. Here, grinding was not only labour, it was ceremony, a cooperation between man and rhythm, between nature and need. Everywhere, the sound of milling was the same language, a heartbeat of civilization. It filled valleys, deserts, and islands with proof of human persistence. Before the taste of bread came the music of effort, the gentle thunder of grain surrendering to the hands that refused to starve. Before chemistry or thermometers, medieval bakers trusted what they could not see, the invisible life that made dough rise. Across Europe they nurtured sourdough starters like family heirlooms. A small lump of yesterday's dough, kept warm overnight, became tomorrow's living culture. It hissed, bubbled, and breathed with wild yeasts from the air. To feed it was to feed time itself. In the Middle East, bakers drew their yeast from the sweetness of nature, from grape skins, dates, or the air of the desert night. Their dough rose in silence beneath cloth, infused with the wild scent of fruit and sand. It was a partnership between earth and patience, where heat and hunger met the slow miracle of fermentation. Meanwhile, in East Asia, people turned to rice wine or fermented grains to awaken dough. In China and Japan, steamed breads like mantu or mochi relied on subtle, damp warmth rather than open flame. The fermentation was gentler, hidden, a slow whisper rather than a roar. No written formula guided them, only instinct, touch, and inherited wisdom. Each batch of dough carried the spirit of the place, the air, the hands, the season. To watch it swell was to witness creation itself, grain becoming flesh, emptiness turning into nourishment. Across faiths and frontiers, this quiet miracle reminded humanity that life begins in the smallest unseen motion. A bubble in a bowl. Bread took countless forms, each one shaped by geography, fuel, and faith. In Europe, loaves were round, heavy, and thick-crusted, built for sharing and lasting. Baked in stone or clay ovens, their surfaces bore the marks of the hearth, cracks, ash, and the imprint of wooden peels. Villagers broke them apart at communal tables, where bread was as much a bond as a meal. In the Middle East, dough became thin and flexible, khubz, naan, pita, baked against the blazing walls of tandoor ovens. Flames licked their edges, giving them a smoky perfume. These flatbreads folded easily around lamb, olives, and herbs, turning a handful of food into a portable feast. Bread here was not cut but torn, a gesture of trust and equality. Across Asia, steaming replaced baking. Soft rice breads, millet cakes, and mantu buns puffed into light, cloud-like textures. They were made not for slicing but for holding, their warmth carrying the comfort of family. In Southeast Asia, dough was wrapped in leaves or pressed on hot stones, infused with the scent of bamboo, banana, or ash. Each region's bread mirrored its world, the climate, the fuel, the taste of its people. From the crusty loaves of France to the steamed buns of China, bread was less a recipe than a reflection of how humans, in every corner of the earth, found warmth in the simplest mixture of grain and fire. To bake bread in the medieval world was to master fire itself. In Europe, the heart of every village beat inside a stone oven, a dome built from earth and rock blackened by decades of smoke. Bakers filled it with wood, burning until the walls glowed red. Then, with careful timing, they swept out the embers, letting radiant heat cook the loaves resting on the hot stone floor. No flames touched the bread, only the ghost of fire. Each oven was alive. It crackled, sighed, and cooled like a breathing creature. Knowing its moods was part of a baker's wisdom. Too hot, and the crust would char. Too cool, and the dough stayed pale and heavy. The act required not instruments, but intuition, the kind earned through sleepless dawns and burned hands. In the Middle East, the tandoor was both furnace and altar. A deep clay pit lined with heat-proof walls, it could reach searing temperatures. Bakers slapped dough onto its inner surface, where it clung for moments before blistering to perfection. Sparks leapt upward, painting the bread with smoke and flame. In Asia, ovens gave way to steamers and clay stoves. Bamboo baskets stacked above simmering pots allowed bread to cook in silence, soft, pale, and glistening. Heat here came from gentleness, not violence. Whether by flame or vapour, all cultures shared one goal: transforming humble grain into the warmth of sustenance, into something that could gather families and silence hunger. Bread was not a single taste. It was a spectrum of textures, sounds, and scents. In Europe, the crust crackled like autumn leaves. Inside, the crumb was dense and sour, flavoured by the wild yeasts that had fermented in wooden troughs. Peasants ate it with broth or cheese. Nobles drizzled honey over it, chasing sweetness from scarcity. Each bite carried the earth's bitterness and the fire's forgiveness. In the Middle East, bread was thin, pliable, and fragrant with smoke. The moment it left the tandoor, it was brushed with oil or butter, folded, and shared. Its edges were crisp, its centre elastic, a companion to roasted lamb, lentils, and olives. Bread there was not only food, but a utensil, a tool for gathering flavours, a symbol of hospitality. In East Asia, softness replaced crunch. Steamed buns and rice cakes offered delicate sweetness, dissolving on the tongue like clouds. Their smooth surfaces shone with steam, their warmth comforting the hands before the mouth. Instead of a crust, there was tenderness. Instead of smoke, the perfume of rice. Flavour followed geography, sour where winters were long, smoky where firewood was cheap, sweet where rice thrived. Every culture found its own harmony between grain and heat. And though their textures differed, brittle or elastic, airy or sticky, all bread spoke one language, the pursuit of warmth, the echo of hunger finely stilled. In the medieval world, bread was never just food. It was a covenant between the sacred and the everyday. In Christian Europe, bread held divine weight. During the Eucharist, it became the body of Christ, a miracle performed weekly at the altar. The act of breaking it was symbolic, a reminder of sacrifice, forgiveness, and shared faith. Every loaf, even those baked by peasants, carried a trace of holiness. To waste bread was a sin, to share it, a blessing. In the Islamic and Persian worlds, bread was also sacred. Many languages shared the same word for bread and life. It was forbidden to throw it away or step on fallen crumbs. Bakers began their work with whispered prayers, acknowledging the flame as both gift and trial. When a family broke flatbread at sunset, it was as if the day itself had been blessed. In East Asia, rituals followed a different rhythm but shared the same reverence. Mochi in Japan and mantu in China were offered to gods and ancestors during the new year, symbols of longevity, fortune, and unity. Their roundness meant completeness, their whiteness, purity. To eat them together was to bind generations through the language of food. Across continents, bread marked births, deaths, marriages, and harvests. It was a circle, beginning and ending in the same hands. For medieval people, faith didn't just live in temples or churches, it lived in the rising of dough, in the quiet miracle that turned hunger into grace. Behind every loaf lay human labour, rhythmic, physical, and deeply divided by gender and class. In Europe, the village baker was almost always a man. He rose before dawn, his hands hardened by heat and flour. The communal oven was his domain, protected by guilds and regulated by lords. Bread here was commerce and craft, a public act of service, yet it carried the authority of men. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, bread was born in courtyards, not workshops. Women kneaded dough at dawn, their movements quiet and practiced. They baked flatbread for family, neighbours, and guests, their skill inherited through generations. In their hands, bread was not a product but a tradition, passed from mother to daughter, like a secret of survival. In East Asia, bread-making intertwined with domestic life. Steamed buns and rice cakes were made by families together, especially during festivals. Children shaped the dough, grandparents tended the fire. The act itself, collaborative and cyclical, mirrored the harmony central to Confucian and Buddhist life. Across regions, the making of bread revealed a map of labour and love. Men controlled ovens, women guarded recipes, families preserved rituals. Each loaf carried fingerprints from both strength and care. Medieval bread was never anonymous. It bore the touch of those who made it, their fatigue, their devotion, their unspoken prayers. Through gender and toil, bread became more than sustenance. It was the human story, imprinted in flour and flame. In medieval society, bread was more than nourishment. It was a visible mark of class. To look at one's loaf was to know one's place in the world. For the wealthy, bread was white, soft, and fragrant. It came from finely sifted flour, wheat stripped of its husk, milled with care, and baked in clean ovens. Honey, butter, or spices were sometimes added, turning sustenance into luxury. At noble tables, bread served not only as food, but as plate, napkin, and privilege. The poor, however, lived on bread of darker hues. Coarse, heavy loaves made from barley, rye, or oats filled their bellies but never their pride. Bran and chaff mixed within, making it bitter and dense. In some winters, even sawdust or beans were ground into the dough to stretch scarce grain. Bread for them was endurance, a proof of survival, not comfort. Monks and soldiers knew another kind, hard, dry rations that could last for weeks on the road. These loaves were practical, not pleasurable, bread boiled or sun-dried until nearly immortal. Thus, across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, bread revealed the silent hierarchy of mouths. The same grain could define kings and beggars. When harvests failed, riots broke out not over gold, but over the absence of bread. It was the measure of justice and hunger alike, a daily reminder that equality was still a dream rising, never fully baked. From the glowing ovens of France to the steaming bamboo baskets of Japan, the story of bread in the medieval world is the story of humanity itself, a tale of transformation, faith, and endurance. Across deserts, monasteries, and rice fields, people took the same humble elements, grain, water, fire, and time, and turned them into life. Bread united what empires divided. It was shared across faiths, by monks chanting in Latin, by imams breaking fast, by farmers bowing before ancestral shrines. Each loaf carried within it the memory of countless hands, those who sewed, ground, kneaded, and watched as dough rose beneath flickering light. To bake was to believe that effort yields sustenance, that time brings reward, that warmth can be created from dust. In every age, bread bridged hunger and hope. It reminded people that survival was never solitary, that each crumb was part of a greater table. Even today, when machines knead and ovens hum with precision, the first scent of baking bread still silences us. It returns us for a fleeting moment to that shared medieval truth, that within the rise of dough lives the rise of humanity, warm, imperfect, and endlessly alive.